Today's reading is from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
I must have been 30-some years old. And Todd and I were getting more and more involved with our church. We were living in Tribune, so it was the United Methodist Church of Tribune just down the road. And I had started teaching Sunday school for the elementary kids, so I had the twins and Tana. And they had been baptized, and Heath got baptized, and they all became official members of the United Methodist Church, and we just were getting more and more active. But one Sunday, for some reason, we weren't having children's Sunday school. And when I think back, I think they must have been practicing for the Christmas program or something like that, but I wasn't meeting with the kids, so I decided to go to the adult Sunday school class. And I was the youngest person in that class. There was only one class. And you need to know, I had been raised in the church. I had been raised in the First Christian Church, wasn't a Methodist church, but I had been attending since I was a little kid. And I had grown up in the church all through high school. And then after high school, I had my own plans, and I kind of got away from attending church like many young people do. And I just didn't make time for God. But I had all of that learning, all of that education that I'd gotten through elementary and junior high and high school about God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus. But as I sat in that Sunday school class that day, I had a realization, an epiphany. I got it. We were talking about grace. And we studied the scriptures, and as we talked, it just really sunk into me for the first time. We are saved by grace. And I stood up at that table and I said, "What?" And I think their eyes were probably this big. This woman is 30-something years old. And I had just, you know how you hear people say things like, "Well, he is a good person. He's saved." No, we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. We're not saved because we go to church every Sunday. We're not saved because we got baptized. We're saved by faith through grace. And that was pretty amazing to me. That was a huge epiphany to me, to realize that Jesus is our salvation. Why hadn't I got it before? Why had that little nugget of truth been buried somewhere in my head, somewhere where I didn't get it? And I felt them as they looked at me, and as I exclaimed, it was just something I'll never forget. I'll always remember their faces and them they were just happy to see somebody get it. And it was a neat day for me. And maybe you can relate. Maybe at some point you've went through something where you've had an epiphany, and it changed the way that you saw things, or maybe even changed the course of your life. I hope so. As I shared last week, some are going to argue that the presentation of Jesus at the temple when he was 40 days old came after the wise men visited, and others will argue that the wise men came much later. However, the church has recognized the arrival of the wise men on the 12th day after Jesus' birth, just like Chuck told you. And we have 12 days of Christmas. January 6th, this coming Wednesday, is actually the day of Epiphany, but we celebrate it on the closest Sunday to that date, which is today. And whether they came immediately after Jesus' birth, or whether they came weeks or even months later, it's important to note that they did not visit Jesus in the stable. They did not see him in a manger. He was, however, still in Bethlehem. We're going to spend some time today talking about this famous visit, or as one theologian has said, the first Star Trek. Who were these wise men, these magi? Well, they were educated men. They studied astrology, and they were known for their ability to adequately interpret dreams. And we know them because other historians wrote about them. They'd been around for 600 or 700 years before Jesus was even born. And a lot of those historians gave more detailed accounts of these magi who lived east of the Roman Empire. They were not kings. We sing the song, "We Three Kings," because this visit has often been cited as the fulfillment of a prophecy that said that kings would come visit Jesus. Listen to these words from Isaiah. "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the people. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come." Sorry, my thing skipped ahead. "Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. And all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense, and proclaiming the praise of the Lord." And that's where we get the "We Three Kings." Also in Psalms, it's kind of repeated in a psalm. "May the kings of Tarshish and the distant shores bring tribute to him. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts." But Matthew never indicates in his book that this visit was the fulfillment of that prophecy. And that's significant because Matthew liked to tell when prophecy was fulfilled from the Old Testament. And he didn't say that when he talked about these men visiting. They were not kings. They were educated and respected, and they held high places in government. In fact, they held high enough places in government that they helped elect the new kings. So they were kind of king makers, but they weren't kings. And besides studying the stars, they also studied different religions. And they knew of the prophecy of a new king for Israel. So these wise men practiced divination. They sought to see the future. We learn throughout the Bible that God specifically forbids the practice of divination. We are not to seek how the future will be through astronomy, through seances, through Ouija boards, through mediums, through any means. And this makes it odd that God would reveal the birth of his own son to these men in this manner. Or does it? Why would God reach out in this way to these men? Why would he allow them to gain any understanding of him or Jesus or anything through these practices? Well, that's the beauty of the story. Jesus came not only for the Jews, but for the pagans as well, for those worshiping false gods and for those who didn't recognize any God. These men were as pagan as you can get, and yet our God showed them the way to his son. There's much that we don't understand about the star that they saw that day, or those many days, but we do know that it led them to make a trip to Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem? Well, that's where the king lived. And they assumed that this baby king would be born in a palace, would be born to a wealthy family, that everyone would know of his birth and everyone would be talking about it. He would be in a city. It would be important. And so they made their way there. And when they came and they started asking where this baby was, the people had no idea what they were talking about. Nowhere in the story does it say there were only 3 of these men. In fact, it is believed that the crowd that came with the wise men was large enough that it stirred people up, and it got Herod's attention in this large city. I have a painting. If you would click on that painting for me. It was actually done on wood, but I think there's a lot of gold in it too. Just double click on it and it should pop up on the left. Sometimes it's stubborn. The painting is also on the front cover of your bulletin, so you can look at it there while they're trying to get it to come up. You can see in the painting that this artist did not see the wise men as being 3 people. He saw it as multiple people coming in. I thought this painting was just gorgeous, and it's huge. It's a giant painting. And the artist actually put himself in there. He is the guy, let's see, he's holding a hawk right behind, let me get my pointer. If I can remember how to use it. Maybe my battery's dead. Well, that's not very helpful. Whenever you look at this, the guy who's kneeling down is the painter. That's the painter's face. He put himself in the picture. And then you see a man standing behind him, also in gold. And then right behind him is a man, and he's holding a hawk. And he's kind of got a thing on his head that's doing this. And that is the guy who paid him to paint the picture. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they put themselves in the pictures, and I think that happened quite a bit back then. But it's kind of a really interesting piece because it has these bubbles on top, if you see the whole thing together. And it has different scenes from them traveling up there. And I thought it would be neat to share that with you today so that you can see that. The passage tells us that Herod was disturbed, and so was all of Jerusalem with him. Why would it disturb the people of Jerusalem? Have you ever heard the phrase, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy? I think you could have said that about Herod. If Herod ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Herod wanted to get to the bottom of this. Who are these visitors? And where is this king that they are searching for? And he didn't know. He didn't know anything about any of this, so he called in the chief priests, and he called in the teachers of the Jewish scriptures. He called in everybody in the Jewish know, and he asked them about this baby, this king of the Jews. Why are these people here, and what are they looking for? And they told him that they knew of the prophecy, and they quoted the book of Micah. The book of Micah that told that Christ would be born in Bethlehem. And so now that Herod had this information, he called the travelers to come in, these people who were looking for the baby, and he questioned them. And it seems to me, as I read this and I think about this, it seems to me that he doubted their story. After all, the chief priests and the teachers were not excited about this birth. Here are these strangers coming in from another place, and they're excited about this birth from prophecy, but the Jewish people themselves don't seem too excited about it. In fact, the Jews didn't even follow them on. He didn't believe that the Magi knew what they were talking about. And because of that, they weren't followed. They weren't followed by him. They weren't followed by the Jewish leaders of the time. They told them it's supposed to be in Bethlehem, and they let him go thinking, And so they went on, and Herod told them what he knew. The baby was supposed to be born in Bethlehem. And he said to them, now go on and see if he's there. And if he is, let me know, because I want to worship him. Sure he did. Herod had no desire to have to fight to retain his authority in his kingdom. There was no room in Herod's life for another king to be around. But the Magi went on to Bethlehem, and they found the child Jesus, not the baby Jesus. It doesn't say the baby. It says they found the child Jesus, and he was in a house, not in a stable. We're told that Jesus was there with his mother. We don't know where Joseph was that day, but Joseph would have been still living at this time, because we hear more about Joseph when Jesus is a little bit older. And of course, we know that they brought gifts, expensive gifts. In fact, the items that they brought would have made Jesus' family independently wealthy. As I've been in seminary, I've heard in multiple classes that the role of Jesus is threefold in this world. He's a prophet, he's a priest, and he's a king. And interestingly enough, these three gifts reflect those three roles. The first gift mentioned is gold. And gold would have been a gift fit for a king. It represented wealth, and it represented power. And it was extremely valuable then as it is today. And the second gift is frankincense. It's a gum resin that comes from an African tree. It could become incense, or the oils be made into perfume. And they used this in the temple to invoke the presence of the Lord. And the smoke represented the prayers of the people rising up to the heavens. Frankincense, therefore, was used by the priests. And the final gift was myrrh. This was an oil. Not only was it used to anoint priests and kings, but it was also used to preserve the dead. In fact, Jesus' body would one day be wrapped with 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes with strips of cloth before it was laid in a tomb. This was a prophecy of things to come, and it represents that Jesus was a prophet, king, priest, and prophet. As we sing the song today, We Three Kings, notice that the words in this carol reinforce the symbolism of the gifts that were brought that day. These pagan men brought these amazing and extravagant gifts, but first they bowed down and they worshiped this child, this King of the Jews. That's important. The first people who came to see Jesus after the night of his birth were not Jews. They were Gentiles. They were pagans. Jesus did not come only for the Jews. He came for everyone. It was an epiphany, and it is truly something to celebrate. Now, I don't know how long these visitors stayed in Bethlehem, but we're told that at least one of them had a dream while they were there. Do you remember that Jesus had a dream where an angel told him that Mary was carrying God's child? It would have been similar to that. One of them had a supernatural dream. And in that dream, they were told that they should not return and give Herod the news of the baby. And so they didn't go back to Herod. They went another route in going home. And after they left, Joseph then had a dream. And in this dream, he was told to take Mary and Jesus, again referred to as a child, not referred to as a baby, and to go to Egypt until the angel came back to tell him it was safe to go home. And they did. He got them up that night, in the middle of the night, and they left for Egypt. Meanwhile, Herod was waiting to hear back from the Magi. So he's back in Jerusalem going, where are they? What's going on? But he never did hear back from them. And he was furious. He was furious when he realized that they were not going to come back to report to him. So with violent as a response as the Herods in the past and the Herods of the future would exhibit in their lives, he ordered that all of the boys in Bethlehem that were 2 years old or younger would be killed. And these orders were carried out. Some people will claim when they hear this that there's no record in history that all of these baby boys were killed. But I want you to think about something. Bethlehem had a population of 300. The baby boys who were 2 and under, there would only have maybe been 5, 6, 7 of them. It wouldn't have been huge news. And the historians of the time didn't live in Bethlehem. They lived in Jerusalem or in other cities. So where we think of all of the baby boys 2 and under, we think all of these baby boys. But there wouldn't have been that many in a town of 300 that were that age and were male. But it would have been devastating to those who did have those kids. And it was an atrocious act, and something that Herod was very capable of doing. So historians today don't doubt that it probably happened. Herod died in 4 BC. Herod died in 4 BC. And we think of our Christian calendar as starting at 0, right? That Jesus was born, that was 0. When he was 1, it was the year 1. When he was 2, it was the year 2. But that wasn't the case. Jesus was actually born in somewhere between 6 BC and 4 BC. And the reason we don't know is because of this story. Jesus is somewhere between 40 days old and 2 years old when this story takes place. He was born somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. Joseph learned of Herod's death, again through a dream, and the family returned to Israel. And eventually they returned to Nazareth. And that's where he and Mary had grown up. And that's where they raised their own family. And this is the last that we hear of Jesus until he's about 12 years old. And he gets lost. His parents lose him on a trip. It can even happen to the best of parents, can't it? But that's a story for another day. For this day, and for this message, you need to soak in the fact that Jesus did not just come for the people who were chosen. He came for me, and he came for you. And this is a great epiphany indeed. Amen.